Well, happy 2024, folks. The real Captain Kirk here. It's time for our 2024 Ag Outlook. Again, talk about the entire world here for the ag farmers. Again, we love working with you guys. Again, this time last year, actually, we were doing this video, AI and Chat GPT. These things weren't even really the buzzwords, and today they are. So we thought we'd ask Alexa, some of these AI bots, what's next year's weather going to be?
We only have weather information for the next 10 days.
Well, the good news is we have the weather information for the next year ahead here and talk about how we can even do that with statistics and climate cycles, not your traditional physics, but ask any of the Alexa series, Chat GPTs about next year's anything, and you get I don't have that information. So again, we do, and you do, and we'll talk about that here today. Started some 34 years ago with me and walk with General Stormman Norman Schwarzkopf at MacDill Air Force Base. Again, dating myself out there if you do the math, but again, give me an answer and don't change your mind once you give me an answer. That's what Stormman Norman Schwarzkopf said to me some 34 years ago. So again, we think statistics, climate cycles, math, not traditional physics. So we're going to move warp speed here. Had to do it. Going to boldly go here into 2024. For Captain Kirk, you had to do that, right? So for 22 years now, at least, we've been working with some of these most successful and admired companies around the world, and you name it, retail, food, beverage, auto, financial services, supply, consumer, outdoor, energy, ag. But again, the group we like working with the most here, again, farmers. Again, your lives depend on the weather to an extent. And again, so we want to talk about that here today. Forbes' fifth most promising company won a lot of tech awards. So again, for the skeptics out there that have never heard of FarmCast and what we're about to talk here today, again, it's pretty cool technology. It's not perfect, nothing is, but again, gives you a lot better idea of what's going to happen here in the year ahead. So again, FarmCast is simply just, again, a product designed to give you long-range information about your farm field anywhere in the world. Again, it's 32 million spots on Earth. The goal here is, do we need more nitrogen, less nitrogen, more bug sprays? Again, just to help with all the farm decisions you have to make, long lead decisions, right? So again, we'll talk about all that here today. One of the big cycles, again, outside of our statistical process, which is the big component of what we do, is the cycles, right? So you're hearing about one of them right now. It's a strong El Nino. It's not the hype that it was the record shattering of all time, because it wasn't. But a strong El Nino, and again, strong things go up, and then you go the other way. So the Pacific's kind of like a sloshing bathtub. As you go up and get warm, you'll kind of slosh back and get cold. And we see that here in the oceanic temperature. So El Nino is just simply that warm in the equatorial Pacific. Unfortunately, we look at all these other cycles of negative PDO in the North Pacific and positive, very warm Atlantic cycle in the Atlantic Basin. Again, these cycles, when they team up, can tell you a lot of things about hurricanes, nor'easters, droughts, floods. So we'll talk about that. If we look at the subsurface now, what we're looking at here is kind of a cross-section of underneath the entire Pacific Ocean, going from Indonesia to the left of this chart, all the way to Ecuador in South America to the right of this chart. Hawaii is kind of in the middle. And what we see is that below the surface, again, 100, 200 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, so again, well south of Hawaii, you see that very, very cold, below normal water temperatures creeping up and eroding this El Nino. So this is how the models can kind of get a handle on how do we know that we're for sure going to get out of El Nino. Well, this is one way we know for sure, because we can see all this very cold water subsurface heading toward the surface. And again, that's just one of many factors. We look at soil moisture here. Again, it's early, but again, it's a bellwether of what we're seeing here, that we have a lot of moisture in the ground across the Corn Belt here. So again, a lot of moisture there, and that'll play a role here in our 2024 outlook. So let's look at the charts here. This is March through November 2024. So we've kind of broken these up into quarterly buckets, and these are kind of some of the maps that you see on your page 5 of your FarmCast, which will be updated here in the next couple of weeks. But again, I'll give you a sneak peek here now before those pages show up on your FarmCast report. So here in spring, which would be a more March, April, May timeframe, kind of cooler, wetter generally is the theme across the Corn Belt and the eastern half of the country, and warmer, drier for the western half of the country here. So these maps are all trends versus last year. We believe that you, as a lot of our clients do, they understand what happened to their business last year, your farm last year. So if we can benchmark these trends against that, we can say, okay, well, look, we got colder, wetter spring here. That's going to lead to some challenges here for planting. And then even if we do get the crops in the ground relatively on time here, we've got some freeze risk, cold, wet soils. Obviously, that has some negative impact on yields. But obviously we've got to get the crop in the ground here, so it'll do what you got to do here, but some negative influence there. Summer, again, we look through that Corn Belt, central part of the country here, cooler, wetter again. So what we're seeing here is probably a lot more nitrogen needs for sure. Again, you can deplete that. So typically when it's colder, wetter, we got more nitrogen needs, more fungicide risk, and less for bugs. Bugs like it hot and dry. We've proven that with all our big clients. And then we get to fall, again, kind of cooler, wetter again is the theme. So again, when you add it all up here, it really speaks to a kind of near record, if not the record shattering yield projection here. So certainly some risk getting the crop in the ground early with more challenging planting season. And one thing we see here as we get to the summer, the drought risk this year is really going to be more East Coast, Northeast, maybe parts of the Southeast, and potentially developing here in the West as we go again to a La Nina cycle. So now let's just break this down here, eye chart here. But so what we're looking at here is like a 10-state aggregate of the Corn Belt, really going from Nebraska to Pennsylvania, but keying in, obviously, weighting toward those Illinois, Indiana, Iowa regions. So these bars show you the year-on-year weekly change in temperature expected in our year-ahead outlook, and the blues bars are colder for that same week a year ago, and red's hotter. The red line is just the Corn Belt kind of aggregate temperature, max temperature, and the light blue line is the Corn Belt min temperature. Chart bottom there is just the precip trends, and so greens are much, much wetter, and the peach bars are much, much drier. And the green line is just kind of a Corn Belt rainfall index. Again, not that useful, but it does show that the wettest week is likely to be there in mid-June timeframe. So again, what we see here, again, one thing is frost risk. We are pretty concerned here about I don't want to say it's late. It's kind of typical, to be honest, but I know we tend to plant in the April timeframe. So that second week in May, and we'll drill into that here in just a second here, but that looks to be a colder week with some frost risk, really for the north central Ohio Valley, even into the east. So that's a concern again. And so again, the theme here is definitely going to need more nitrogen fungicides. If you can plan that again, even if you make a 5-10% adjustment in that direction, and 5 to 10% less for the bugs and the weeds, because they don't tend to do as well when it's obviously cooler, wetter versus hotter, drier. Again, just some of the trends here. So let's drill into that 10 through 14 period. Now, again, we're down to a 4-day period here, so there's some risk in here in terms of the skill, but pretty good. Again, our year-ahead daily forecast have less error than a week 2 short-range forecast, even though it's a year ahead here. So everywhere from that dotted line, let's just say from far southwest Kansas, across northern Missouri, northern Indiana, Illinois, even into parts of Pennsylvania here. Some frost risk here for that 10 through 14 period here. So much, much warm. Last year was just, last couple of years have been very, very warm. And when we see a statistical trend like this, usually it gets very, very cold, the pattern after this. So again, you can see those maps, less versus average, the central map there, and then the far right map is versus last year. So much, much colder cycle here. So certainly some risk, just to factor that in. I'm not saying you'd plant this late, but maybe you plant a little bit later than weather may force you to plant later anyway here because of potentially a wetter April, May timeframe. So let's just aggregate these trends. Now here we're looking at the U.S. growing season. Again, just trying to pick out some big picture stuff here. So 15 April through 15 September, kind of the core growing season. And we see here in the Corn Belt, now the trend here for the Corn Belt is the coolest in 4 years. Maybe it's just a hair below average for this time frame. A little misleading there because I think it's going to have some periods of pretty cold to pretty warm in the middle, maybe June, July could be warmer. Rainfall, wettest in 5 years, above average again. So that almost entire Corn Belt, those critical counties from Nebraska, Minnesota, that got hit hard last year, Minnesota, Wisconsin, looking pretty good, wet. Again, that drought signature is more toward the northeast and the southeast and the west coast and maybe the central Rocky Mountains. So again, that chart below is just the trends on a Corn Belt level. Again, it's about a 9-state aggregate of temperature left chart and precip right chart. If we look at some of the other things that we're concerned about that are just secondary influences on the 2024 season is just severe weather. We do believe we're in the worst potential billion-dollar disaster year in 7 years. A lot of that's going to be hurricanes, hurricanes for Texas and extreme South Florida. That makes about 190 billion of the 286 billion that we're projecting here. So hurricanes are a big concern. Texas is ground zero for our forecast. Everything is screaming Texas. Last 4 or 5 years is more toward Florida, maybe the north central Gulf. This year it's more the southwest Gulf. So again, more toward Texas. Winter storms, this is part of this year and part of in the front half of next year. But again, it's not a huge factor, but most in 3 years. Freeze ag damage, again, we do have some concerns again about that May timeframe. And again, so again, certainly some risk here for not only corn planting, but even some of the strawberries and things that are planted farther in the east. Severe weather is going to be our second biggest thing outside of hurricanes. We do believe the tornadic season is going to be the worst in 13 years, back to 2011, 2019. It's in a very active year. Last year was the most in 4 years. This year's the most again in 4+ years. Wildfires, we'll have to see here. We think we've had some really wet conditions, snowy conditions, obviously last year in the West. A lot of vegetation grew, and we didn't have any fires last year. It was actually one of the least active seasons in 30 years. 30+ years. So again, we've got a lot of vegetation out there that could burn this year as we get into the more late September, October timeframe in the West. But we do think that that's going to be an uptick of the most in 4 years. Not so worried about those Canada fires that made it so smoky here last year. We don't really see that for Canada this year. It's more toward the southwest part of the U.S. Again, maybe the central Rockies for some of those wildfires and flooding for sure here. Flooding this spring on the East Coast just could be near historic. We're already some of the wettest conditions in 40, 50 years, and we're not even done with the winter rain spring. So again, a lot to east is certainly potentially, and maybe Southern California. We just look at some of these maps. These maps were produced quite some time ago, but again, just looking at our long-range weather and what it means for some of these severe weather categories. So those red areas are an early tornado season. Now, this is only through March. We do think going to be some pretty severe weather in March. Can't bring this strong jet stream, subtropical jet stream El Nino, and clashing with the polar jet stream to the north. Just classic tornadic signature, a lot of spinning in the atmosphere and a lot of energy in the atmosphere. So those red shaded areas, tornadoes, green dotted line areas, flooding. Again, East Coast, Carolinas, really here in Pennsylvania, Northeast. Flooding is a major concern. River flooding, stream flooding, basement flooding, you name it, flooding. Had some wind damage already here in the Northeast with these big nor'easters. Already had some of this snow ice event here, again, that created quite a bit of accidents, again, and flooding there in Southern California, which will, again, as that dries up in April, you've got all this underbrush that'll be ready to burn. So then April, June, that flooding risk in California will be done by April, but a mess here. Apologize for the eye chart here. So the green dotted areas are where you'd see flooding. We've kind of hatched those areas in the central U.S. where we think there's some flooding risk down in Louisiana, maybe Florida, certainly the mid-Atlantic into the southern Northeast. The red dotted line area is just kind of that tornadic signature. Again, it's shifting a bit. We didn't have much of this really last year entirely, but and then the blue areas, again, that late frost freeze risk, again, kind of in that north central region. Hail is the orange shaded areas, again, going from Texas into Iowa, and some even here in the mid-Atlantic, more toward the May-June timeframe. So bottom line is, if you look at that mess there in Iowa, I mean, Iowa's got flooding risk and minimal, but hail and tornadoes and freeze. There's a lot to contend with here. So again, just because we do believe that it'll be a very, very strong crop yield year, there are certainly some folks that here are just going to get hit hard with a tornadic event that, again, they're isolated. They're not going to rip up the entire state of Iowa or Illinois, obviously, but certainly some risk for farmers in the heartland here as we get in the summer time frame. Now, this is the later part of summer, June, July, August, September. Again, we're going to bring in that hurricane risk along the mid-Atlantic. Extreme South Florida. We're not as worried about North Florida, which has been kind of the bullseye here lately, but more Miami, Key West, and then those will track. So this is kind of a deep south track here this year. We think through the Caribbean into the southwest Gulf toward Texas. So it's not really entirely an East Coast signature, and it's not entirely a Florida signature. It's really more toward glancing shots for South Florida going into Texas. And then fortunately, hurricanes, you got tornadoes, you got floods. So again, droughts and 3-year droughts in parts of Texas here ends in floods and tornadoes and hurricanes. And some of that moves up even to the upper Midwest. Again, I know Minnesota hard hit with drought last year, Wisconsin, probably not this year. Again, looks like more of a flood signature. Not a lot of hail in this type of pattern. We do see some materializing drought in the Northeast and maybe pockets of the Southeast, and that fire risk we'll see about Southern California, the Sierras, more brush type fires into parts of Utah, even Wyoming. As we get into the late part of this year, into October, December, hard to pick out any major events, but we're going to continue with that developing drought theme in the Rocky Mountains into the plains as we transition to La Nina and that fire risk. Drought developing again, New England, as we go into this. Still got some hurricane risk. October here is going to be October, November, maybe another hurricane event in October in Texas. And with that landfalling event, you can get sign of flooding as it goes inland into that Tennessee, southern Ohio Valley area. So maybe one or two more systems to contend with as we get into the very late October timeframe. So let's take a tour around the world here. Again, Europe, this is the 2024 growing season now, 15 April through 15 September. So again, core of the season. Again, the blue shading areas are showing where it's colder than last year. Gray is similar to last year, and map right is precip. Yellows and peaches are drier than last year, and the greens are wetter. A critical area is Ukraine here. So we see more eastern Ukraine, again, where they grow a lot of more wheat and cereal type products. Warm and dry, so there could be some minimal impact there for some of those crops. Corn is grown more toward the western part of Ukraine, north and west part of Ukraine, and that's kind of similar, slightly cooler and wetter, much wetter. So corn may do pretty well versus, say, their wheat may not do as well. We drill into China here. China is always a weird animal in terms of figuring out what's going to happen there because they don't tell you much. But northeast part of China is kind of their Heilongjiang and Jilin and some of their northeast corn belt. Their central corn belt might be like their Beijing area. And then they've got a southern corn belt that starts much earlier. But northeast and central corn belt is drier. So certainly some risk to their crops. We don't see a record heat with this pattern. So cools in 5 years, drier than last year. Average for China overall, but again, their northeast corn belt, central corn belt looks pretty dry again. So that's just something to watch with what China will do. Brazil would be going into their second safrinha crop here, 15 February through 30 June now. So this is just their second crop. The good news, bad news is they've had some drought this year. It's not been as extreme. They've had heavy rainfall in the southern and part of Brazil's growing regions, but Mato Grosso has been pretty dry. That's Mato Grosso is also where they have the safrinha crop, the majority of it. So they're already harvesting to some extent. So the good news is the safrinha crop will probably go in the ground on time to keep it out of the extremely dry period that's beyond July, August, September timeframe. But if we look at the map right here, we see that Mato Grosso is kind of in those areas here where it is. Try to key in on that here a little bit here, but it's the kind of that central area there, Brazil, where it's still got some yellows and peaches, so dry, still wet for the southeast part of Brazil's crop. So again, some risk. I just don't think you're going to get earth-shattering news out of Brazil here. Again, they're certainly lowering their yield expectations, but again, not catastrophically low. So I don't know if this will be enough to move. And then with the potentially good growing conditions, obviously in America, may not see a lot of impact here with that safrinha crop. And again, we'll just look quickly here. Not telling you anything you don't know already here, but we've come off our highs from a couple of years ago. And again, there's just not a lot of news here that would suggest that we're going to have anything near these highs. Obviously, corn down 48 off its high, soybean 33, wheat 53. So hard to say if we're bottoming out here again with a potentially record yield in the U.S. Obviously, these could go lower, but again, just not a lot of weather potential outside of minimal impact in Brazil and maybe some very minimal impact in Ukraine for wheat. Not seeing much in Russia and some impact in northeast China. So again, let's just talk real quick here. Again, how we do this. The statistical math-based approach. Again, it's a lot of math, millions of lines of codes. Traditional meteorology, and again, all the team here, some of the folks, Pam, Chrissy, Rich, me, Matt, Evan, that you talk to with your FarmCast, are all meteorologists, physicists. But if you just had one storm, one drop in a lake, this would be easy physics, right? We predict one storm. Physics could handle this. The challenge of meteorology is it's chaos. You've got millions of interactions at the surface and then 100,000 feet up in the atmosphere. Predicting all that with physics, fluid dynamic computer models, it's chaos. That's why your forecast is forever changing every day, 4 times a day, and it degrades with time. So that's not what we do. Again, ours is a more statistical climate cycle. And I say if you can figure out this sine wave, I call it the sloppy sine wave, you can use how we predict the weather. Again, you see this in the oceans. El Nino is a sloshing pattern up and down. Sometimes it gets amplified here. We're just weak events. And then all of a sudden you see you go into the pattern like we're in right now, where you've got these major sloshing patterns of El Nino, strong El Nino to strong La Nina. You see this in the sun, you see this in the tides, you see this in the moon, you see this pretty much everywhere. So we applied that science some 34 years ago to what we do today. Statistics 101, we just like to look at trends. We look at these statistical trends by day for 32 million spots. But if anytime you've had a really, really warm March, 1 standard deviation warm March in the Northeast, guess what? You've got about a 94% chance that next year's cold and snowy March, right? So if you got those kind of odds, you play those odds statistically to predict temp, rain, and snow, sensible metrics a year ahead. So again, we look at the cycles very differently. A lot of folks try to line up the cycles today to predict February next month, and that just doesn't work. If you let these cycles evolve over the next 6 to 9 months, guess what? They're pretty good predictors of next year, right? So again, we just believe that let the oceans kind of play out. And again, you just saw this year, La Nina last year was supposed to be, very dry and no snow for California, and they had one of the snowiest winter in history, recorded history, right? El Ninos are supposed to be epic snow in California, and they had a very, very slow start, and they're still below average, right? So you got to be very careful looking at just one climate indice, like El Nino, La Nina. Unfortunately, too many do, even NOAA. Again, you just got to let them all play out. So speaking of NOAA here, again, this blue line is kind of our year ahead. If we're going to talk year ahead weather, you got to show how good or bad it is. The blue line is our year ahead forecast for the 1,000+ locations that NOAA tracks, and the orange line is their month ahead forecast for the same 1,000 locations using their Heidke skill score methodology, not our methodology, but theirs. So apples to apples to apples. The only difference is ours is a year ahead. So despite being a year ahead over the last 16 years, we've outperformed them 85% of the time on temperatures. The higher above that zero line, the more skill there is. And then preset chart bottom left, we beat them about 86% of the time, despite being a year ahead. So statistics and cycles really work. This is just kind of the weekly chart here for pick the biggest county of corn in the country here around the Des Moines, Iowa area. So these bars are the year ahead forecast for last year through this last week here, January. So 2023 January through 2024 January. So reds are much warmer, blues are colder. You can see it captured that pretty well. The big warm December and then the big plunge in January when we just had near historic cold in some cases. Tesla's frozen in Chicago was kind of amusing. Batteries fail in cold weather. So we talk about that with our big CPG type clients. So again, did well, about 80.4% accurate and hitting those weeks. And the error in this forecast is actually less than a day 5 short range forecast. So that's how good. Normally we say we're better than a week 2 forecast, even though we're a year ahead. But this was actually better than a day 3, 4 forecast. So pretty good here in Des Moines. And then the peach bars are dry and wet. Greens are wet. Get about 80.4% on hitting. So if we can hit these dry weeks and the cycles and the trends here, you can start to get a sense, hey, I can maybe do some cutting in this period, or I can do some spraying in this period, or it looks like my overall pollination risk for heat is very low. So again, that's just how we help you plan. Again, all that's available in your FarmCast product and the web product. So real quick here, again, just talk about our core business here. Again, has some application for some of the big ag folks. Our goal is to take not only the year ahead weather, but then inputs, give us your yields or product sales or retail store traffic, you name it, we do it. In fact, a neat product we just analyzed here was horse blankets, for a farmer in a ag company here. But we call this our Power of 1 Degree technology. Every degree colder or hotter has an influence on seasonal sales. So things like flowers, bedding flowers, plants that you buy maybe at Home Depot, Lowe's, or Tractor Supply. Every degree warmer in the spring, about an 8% bounce in sales. 10 degrees hotter in a given week, 80% bounce in sales. So again, this is how we help the big tractor supplies of the world. And like I said, a new horse farm product company here that sells horse blankets and other horse-related products. It was about a similar trend here of about 5, 6, 7% of movement of horse blankets in cold weather. So it gets really cold. Obviously, we worry about our horses and buy the horse blankets. So again, it really impacts just about everything we do. So the outputs of our technology are more of a sales forecast for our big customers, again, week by week. But again, the product you see here is a little more consumer friendly. Again, for you is just the FarmCast. Again, tells you one thing I'll show you here in a minute. You got to just set your planting date here. That's the only thing you really have to do on the website. And then FarmCast was away you go. It's a email PDF every morning. Tells you what happened since your planting date. Growing degree days, rainfall, soil moisture, soil temp, evaporation rates. You name it, it does it. So kind of tracks where you've been, what's going to happen today. So you can kind of plan your activities for today. What's the week 1 forecast, week 2 forecast. Page 4 is the year ahead forecast. And then page 5 here we'll be updating here in a week or two. So look for that here. It'll be some of what we shared here today, but specific to your farm, right? So it'll tell you how many growing degree days in your farm zip code area. Do we think you need more nitrogen, more herbicides, more insecticides, tornado risk, hail risk, hurricane risk, flood risk? Really tries to, best planting dates, best harvest dates. So all of that on page 5. Again, we got to do this for 42,000 zip codes, but all of that will be available here in the next week or two. So probably by Valentine's Day, look for that page 5 popping up on your FarmCast report. And again, the only thing you got to do here on FarmCast on the website is just go in and when you log in, just pick your planting date. So you won't probably do this until March or April, obviously, but March or April, just go do that. And then that way the tracking tool here on the top of page 1 of the FarmCast will how many growing degree days, how much rainfall since your planting date. So again, that's the only thing you really need to do. And again, never need to hit the website again if you don't want to. Pam, Chrissy, and team put out a great product every Monday morning. Again, they're kind of their global grains report. Obviously, this time of year, we talk Brazil and the rest of the world, down under, sometimes about Australia. And as we get into the core U.S. season, we'll be talking about the U.S. season. Another tool available in the website. Again, once you set it up once, you don't need to go back to the website. I always say just do it once and then you're done. It's kind of these severe weather tools. You can obviously get all the severe weather alerts, text or email for tornadoes and winds and floods and snow, you name it, it'll do all of those. But the neat ones that I like are these pick your specific parameters. Bill, I want to be alerted to 85 and 92 because that's when I'm going to cut the hay, or I need UV of this or winds of this or rain, no rain or clear sunny skies, right? So pick your parameters here and this will tell you in the weeks, days ahead and even months ahead when this condition is likely to occur. So it's a neat alerting tool, custom tool. So again, check it out. And that way you'll get a text, hey, you wanted 90 and sunny and dry and no winds for spring. Guess what? That'll happen on, April 18th. So again, a neat tool to check out. And again, lots of powerful tools for those that really want to dive in and chart it, map it, plot it, you name it. You can do it in the wtr360.com portal. So again, FarmCast is $3.99 a year. Again, a neat tool. Again, we hope to deliver a lot of value here. And again, you got a great team of folks that can answer your questions. Pam, Chrissy, and Rich are kind of the ag side of the business here. So again, email us at support@wt360.com or 610-807-0118, and Pam will answer your questions here with FarmCast. So we will end here with, again, a promotional video for folks that don't know about FarmCast, and again, a testimonial from one of our longtime ag supporters. God bless you, folks. Be safe. Again, lots of weather to contend with, but the good news here, if we get the crop on the ground, it should be a pretty good 2024. So again, God bless you. Have a great season.
When approached by weather trends in the spring of 2014, I was a real skeptic. Hearing that a company could come in and predict long-range weather with the accuracy they were claiming seemed crazy. That spring, our first touch of realizing that there was something there was they showed planting windows really early on and then really some rainouts for a lot of our seed production facilities. That year, our seed production facilities were able to get in before everybody else. They got a leg up and they became a believer, and then the rest of the company went from there.